Well, happy Mother's Day, all of our moms out there, and that includes you spiritual moms as well. We're so grateful for you. We love you. We appreciate you. And we just want to say thank you this morning on Mother's Day. Well, my name's Jared. I'm the pastor at 1116 Church, and I get the privilege every week of being able to teach and preach God's Word. And today we're actually starting a brand new series called Home Church. Now, this is actually kind of a 2.0 version of Home Church because we've been doing Home Church for the past several months, but we've been learning a lot about Home Church. And so we want to talk to you about some different things of value as to what we've seen and where we've grown in our home church setting, because we know for some of you, you may not be connected into a home church yet. You may still even be questioning, what are you guys doing? And so I want to make sure that I'm communicating clearly to you where the value is in home church. And so one of the things we'll be talking about today is relationships. So I've got some stuff here to help us kind of make that illustration. Some mac and cheese that my wife has so graciously prepared for us today. And so as we talk about relationships, we're really going to be talking about relationships in and outside of a home church setting. And my hope is by the end of this message, you'll be able to walk away with a better biblical understanding of relationships, how to navigate those different relationships, and have a healthy relationship with God. So today we're going to be searching through the 4 Gospels, right? Now that's just 4 books of the Bible in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that kind of give us detail about Jesus's earthly ministry. And that's really what we're going to learn from, is from Jesus's examples of his relationship during his earthly ministry. Because we want to be like Jesus, right? So we want to follow in his example, kind of see how he interacted with different people. And it makes me think about macaroni and cheese, right? Because life and relationships are like macaroni and cheese. Forrest Gump was not right. It's not like a box of chocolates. It's like macaroni and cheese. And so I've actually got some tasty, well, usually it's tasty, like box macaroni and cheese. It's pretty good. Like box macaroni and cheese is like a staple in our house, right? Because it doesn't take a long time. I know I'm coming out of frame, but it doesn't take a long time to make. We actually have to do gluten-free macaroni and cheese, but they still make a box version of it. It's really simple. You can make it on the go after you've worked all day, come home, make this pretty easily. It's great. But the better version is some homemade macaroni and cheese. Now, like, this is my favorite, and I'm gonna get like a corner piece here, because the corner pieces, like with the crust at the end, that's really where it's at. Like, this is home cooking network for home church right now. This is amazing. So good. I love homemade macaroni and cheese. The problem with it takes a lot of time to prep, right? It takes a lot of time to cook. It's usually only meant for like a Thanksgiving gathering. And as I was thinking about these macaroni and cheeses, it reminds me a lot of relationships. You know, our home churches are going to be kind of like box macaroni and cheese gatherings, right? Like, these are people that we do life with. We're on the go. We're able just to make it in a minute. You know, like, these are the staples of our life. But, you know, there is space for homemade macaroni and cheese. Like, homemade macaroni and cheese is for like those Thanksgiving gatherings, right? Those large gatherings, those big gatherings, which is kind of like our on-site service. So every time we gather on-site, we bring the whole family, the extended family together, and we're able to actually partake in something real special with live worship and with kids ministry and with live teaching. All of those things are great, but we don't always have time, resources, and availability to get everybody together all the time. And so I want to kind of look at Jesus's life, because this is also kind of similar to the relationships that he had. And so I want you to turn, if you can, to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. And again, we're talking about relationships today, what they look like inside and outside of a church. But we're going to look and see how Jesus had large group gathering relationships. He had small group gathering relationships. And then if you stick around to the end, I'm going to give you a bonus one as well. All right. So let's go to Matthew 14. Look at verse 13. It says this: when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, right? And he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. And then he's actually later going to go on and end up feeding 5,000 plus people. So we see that there's this huge gathering around Jesus all the time, and he's healing people. He's performing these miracles. And this just becomes a theme throughout the four gospels. So go to Matthew chapter 19. I'm going to start going through these pretty quick, so stay with me. And they're in the notes online if you want to check those out. Matthew 19 verse 2 says, a large crowd followed him, and he healed them there, right? Go to Matthew chapter 20, verse 29. It says, as they were out of Jericho, a great crowd followed him. Now let's go to Mark chapter 3, verse 7. Mark chapter 3, verse 7. It says, Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed. Verse 8, it talks about as they're coming beyond the Jordan from around Tyre and Sidon, when the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because the crowd that was around him would crush him, right? Like the crowd was so big, there was a fear of literally getting trampled by the crowd, right? That's a pretty large gathering. Mark chapter 5, verse 18 through 43, I'm just going to read verse 21, says this, and when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Mark chapter 10, verse 1. And he left there and he went to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan, and crowds gathered to him again and again, as was his custom, he would teach them. So he spent time healing people, and he also spent time teaching in these large crowds. In Luke chapter 5, verses 18 through 19, he says, and behold, some men were bringing on a bed of a man who was paralyzed, and they were seeking to bring him in and lay him before Jesus, but they found no way to bring him in because of the crowd. So Jesus is teaching in this house, and this house is so crowded, so overpacked with people that some friends are trying to bring their paralyzed buddy in, and they can't even find space for him because it's such a large gathering. So the thing I want us to understand is that we don't need to be cynical about large gatherings. I know we've been doing home church, and for many of you that have been attending a home church, it's exciting, it's great, you're loving the relationship side of it, but you're going to be tempted to look at other churches or to look at big gatherings and maybe to be kind of cynical of them. But the thing that you need to understand is that Jesus made time for large gatherings. In fact, there's a time and a place for large gatherings that God can use that, and he works in that, and they're a blessing. And I would say for me, doing this home church experiment thing, one of the greatest things that I miss is our large gatherings on a weekly basis, right? I know some of you, you're like, man, I miss kids ministry every week and I miss that. If there's anybody that misses something, it's me, the pastor, right? Like I miss being able to teach in a large gathering Sunday after Sunday, but there's a time and a place for it. It's not that it's bad. It's just that when it becomes the focus, it can be pretty unhealthy. And we'll see that as we continue to read on. Go to John chapter 6. John chapter 6. It says in verse 2, a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing with the sick, right? And then he feeds the 5,000. Now go to Matthew chapter 8. Let's cross-reference that of what's going on. So he's feeding people. He's healing people. This is why people are following him, because it's exciting, right? Just like an on-site service, it's exciting. Just like homemade macaroni and cheese. Like you've been eating boxed macaroni and cheese, that's been kind of your diet, and then you come to Thanksgiving gathering and you see all your friends and family there, and there's that crust on the macaroni and cheese, and it's like, I am so excited to eat this. Nobody cares about the Macy's Day Parade. Nobody cares about football. It's all about that macaroni and cheese. We get so excited about those things that come with the large gathering, but they're for a season. Look in Matthew 18, look at verse 16. Or Matthew 8, verse 16, it says this. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with the word, and he healed all who were sick. So again, large gatherings coming to Jesus to get something. Verse 17, this was fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illness and bore our disease. Now there's a transition though that I want us to see from the large gathering to a small gathering. Verse 18 says, Now, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to go to the other side. And a scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Why? Because Jesus is healing people. Jesus is teaching people. There's excitement where Jesus is. And so people are wanting to follow. But Jesus says, "Hey, guys, let's get in a boat and let's go to the other side." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds have air. Our birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." In other words, there's a time and a place for a large gathering, but there's also a time and a place where things need to get smaller and more intimate. And many people will want access to you. Many people wanted access to Jesus, but Jesus had to establish boundaries and couldn't be accessible to everyone at every time during his earthly ministry. And so we see a transition in his ministry that Jesus not only met in a large gathering, but he also met in small, intimate gatherings as well. And this is where our home churches come in, right? Like home church is a place where relationships can go deeper, where discipleship can really happen, where accountability can really happen. For so many people in a large service gathering, it's so easy to get lost in a crowd and to kind of sneak in and sneak out. You can't do that in a home church setting. It's much more intimate. And so I want us to go through and read some examples of Jesus' smaller gatherings as well. Go to Mark chapter 6 and verse 31. Mark chapter 6 and verse 31. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves." He's talking to his disciples, "to a desolate place and rest for a while." He told his close companions, his disciples that were following him, he's like, "Listen, we've been out, we've been doing the large gathering thing, we've been making the homemade macaroni and cheese. Now it's time to just go and find a place where we can rest." And he says, "For many were coming and going and they had no leisure to even eat yet." So he says, we need to find space where we can just make some boxed macaroni and cheese and just relax and hang out for a minute. Verse 32 says, "And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves." You know, Jesus made space for the large crowds, but he also made space for his immediate friends, his disciples that followed him. In Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, we see a similar example. It says, "Soon after he went through the cities and the villages, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary Magdalene, from whom the 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, and who was the Herod's household manager, and Susanna, and many others who provided them their means." And so we see that now it's not just a large crowd, right? It's not just some generic large crowd that the scriptures speak of, but now we actually start getting some names, like Mary Magdalene, like Joanna, like his 12 disciples, right? Like this was a specific small group that had personal access to Jesus almost anytime, anywhere. In Luke chapter 9, we see, this is at the Mount of Transfiguration. In verse 28, he says, and you can read down to verse 36 in your home church if you want to. But he says in verse 28, "Now about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter, John, and James, and he went up to the mountain to pray." So again, a small gathering, an intimate gathering. In Luke chapter 10, verse 38 through 42, he spends time with Martha and Mary, right? And if you cross-reference that and you go to John chapter 11 and 12, you see that Martha, Mary, and their brother Lazarus, who ended up dying and Jesus raised from the grave, these 3 siblings, it said Jesus loved dearly, right? He was in close friendship and relationship with them. And so here's what I want to tell you as your pastor that maybe you've never been told before, or maybe you're just, you've been carrying a burden, you've been carrying a weight on you that is not necessary. And I know Michelle Garbay's listening right now, my wife's listening right now, and they're about to probably start shouting, and they're not shouters, right? But I want to give you permission to not be accessible to everyone, right? Like you are not called to be everyone's best friend. In fact, if you are trying to be everyone's best friend, you're not going to have any friends. You can't get close to everyone. You have to work inside of the circle that God has given you, which is why our mission statement is so important. Our mission statement is this, is that it's our job to connect people to God, to the church, and to their world. Now, we use their world specifically there. We don't just use the word the world because we want to make it clear and that you understand that your responsibility, your role is to just reach the people that are in your sphere of influence. You're not called to reach everybody. You can't. It's impossible. You would be burned out, but you can reach the people that God has put before you, like people in your workplace, like people in your neighborhood, like people in your family, like people in your home church. And so again, I'm giving you permission that it's okay if you're not best friends with everybody. Just because someone likes your Facebook post does not mean that you're friends. There's a difference in friends and acquaintances, right? You can have many acquaintances, which is our social media is full of those, but maybe only a few friends. And that's okay. Don't stress out about it. The same is true even in a church setting. When we gather on site, I love being able to see the different faces and people that gather in our community at 1116. But I also know that if everyone were to reach out to me and want to have lunch this week, I wouldn't have time to do it and not shepherd and care for my family well and not do my job well and not keep my own sanity well. I'm limited because I'm human, right? The same thing during Jesus's earthly ministry is that, yes, he's God in the flesh, but he's still in the flesh, and he's only able to be so many places at so many times. And so there were instances where, yes, he would be in a large group gathering and he would minister to large groups, but then there were also times where he would set himself away and be with just his close friends. This is the whole concept of home church. You can't be everybody's friend, but you can be about 10 people's friend really well in your home church setting. These are people that we are hoping that will be the first point of contact when there's a need, when you mourn together, when you rejoice together. That instead of calling anybody else, that you would reach out to people in your home church. These are the people that would hold you accountable, that they see your life and they see your testimony, and maybe you're getting off track. They can lovingly come alongside of you and hold you accountable and push you. And like Proverbs says, iron sharpens iron. You know, it's not really great to get criticism or correction from somebody who's not a friend. It comes a lot greater and is a lot more impactful when it comes from somebody that you actually have a relationship with. Rebuking without relationship can cause some animosity there. So in a home church setting, if someone rebukes you, hopefully you would know that they care about you and love you, and this isn't going to benefit them in any way. It's benefiting you and your well-being. We find these types of relationships, I believe, in a home church setting. We see some other examples in Luke chapter 18. The prediction of Jesus' death is with just his disciples. Side note, let me make this clear too, because I think this is important as well. In the prediction of his death, and in a lot of those private meetings that Jesus had with that smaller gathering, that smaller group, guess who was in that group? Judas. Judas was in that group. And the reason why I think that's important is that Judas was allowed to be in the small circle of Jesus, which means that in a home church gathering, there will be sometimes people that are in your small group that you might not have picked, that you might not even want to be there. And that's important because of diversity, which is one of our core values, right? Because if we're just getting in groups of people that look like us, act like us, talk like us, we're kind of getting a little cultic, right? Jesus surrounded himself with a diverse group of guys, even somebody that he knew was going to deny him and reject him and end up turning him in to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. Like Jesus allowed Judas, that always baffles me. He allows Judas to be a part of the inner circle. And so be careful about how you do your home church. Don't get cliquey. Don't become just some social club where you gather together and you're just full of a bunch of people like yourselves. But it's great to have people with different backgrounds and different opinions and different cultures to gather together, as long as they're grounded in the gospel, as long as they're grounded in Jesus, right? Like that is the cornerstone of our relationships. We want to honor God with that. And so I thought that was an interesting side note. In Luke 22, verses 7 through 23, you see Jesus have the Last Supper. Again, everybody wasn't invited to that meal. I know he fed the 5,000 with the fish and the loaves, but only in this meal did he just allow his close kind of home church, small gathering to sit alongside and to partake of the bread and the wine. In Luke 24, we see his ascension, right? We see Jesus' mother. We see Mary. We see the disciples come and they see the resurrected Lord. There was a small gathering. And then after that, we see that there's 500 plus that saw the resurrected Jesus, right? But here's what I want you to understand. We sometimes misconstrue the Bible to say that church is supposed to be something that just keeps growing and getting bigger and getting larger into this mega church mentality. And that's not always scriptural. Look at John chapter 6, verse 66. John chapter 6, verse 66, it says this. It says, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? Do you want to leave me? Luke 12:32, he calls that few that was still following him his little flock. Simon Peter answered and said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God, right? Small groups and home church is not bad. I know some of you, I even feel the tension when you tell people about what we're doing, that you feel a little embarrassed, right? I've even felt that way talking to some of my other pastor friends, because they've asked me when are you opening up yet? When are you going to open back up your building? When are you going to start going back to regular services? When are you going to build a bigger building to hold more people? And when I tell them, well, we've never really had a vision to do that. We've never really had a vision to build 1,000-seat auditoriums. Our heart was to send people out. To keep things smaller. And now even more so in a home church setting, that we're keeping things smaller. And so it doesn't feel like the homemade macaroni and cheese. It doesn't feel like the big extravaganza thing. And so if we think if it's not homemade macaroni and cheese, if it's not the big gathering, then God's not showing up. And that is so far from the truth. Jesus himself, if we're looking at examples of ministry, Jesus went from a very large gathering of people who wanted to be fed by him bread. And when he starts telling them that he's the bread of life and they need to partake of him, in John chapter 6, they all start walking away. It's okay for things to get small. There's beauty in the simple and small things, right? In fact, the Bible even teaches us to be faithful in small things. And so when you gather every week, I don't want you to be ashamed of what you're doing. Be proud of it. Celebrate it. Because God shows up anywhere, anytime, any place. It doesn't have to be in some large cathedral. It can be right in your home, one of the most impactful moments that you can have with our living God. I want you to be encouraged by that today. So keep coming to the table. Keep coming to the small gathering. Keep getting involved. And if you haven't gotten involved yet, I challenge you, I encourage you, I beg you, I urge you to get involved in a home church. It's so easy to sign up for one. All you got to do is go to my1116.info and then click on the sign up for a home church button. It's that easy. We will do all the legwork and help you get connected into a community. But I got one more bonus I want to share with you before we leave this morning. We've got kind of one more bonus relationship as we're trying to navigate and figure out relationships. Because again, large group gatherings are great. Small group gatherings are great. But I also want us to talk about Jesus in solitude. There were moments where Jesus would actually not just separate himself from a large crowd, but even from his small crowd. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 13, he went away alone by himself because of grief. In Mark chapter 1, verse 35, he went away because of exhaustion. In Luke chapter 5, verse 16, and Luke chapter 6, verses 12 through 13, he went away just to pray by himself. In Luke 22, verses 39 through 44, he went away because he was distressed. These are okay things as well. And again, I just feel my wife in the background. She's probably speaking in tongues right now, because she's just so excited to hear that you have permission also to get away from the small gathering and just spend time with you and God. Your personal vitality is important. And there are some moments in your Christian walk where you just need time alone with God. I learned this personally when I took my sabbatical. I'm a people person. I love being around people, but my wife actually kicked me out of our house during our 7-week sabbatical. I spent an entire week alone on the lake in a she shed, Airbnb place by myself with no internet, no TV, my guitar, a Bible, and a journal. And I was scared, right? Because I don't like being alone. I like spending time with people, and you may be like me. Some of you, when COVID hit though, you loved it because you're kind of introvert and you're like, I just want to be alone by myself. So there is a balance to where we're not always isolated or where we never isolate. There's a balance in the middle that has to find a healthy place of finding some isolation, some Sabbath, some rest where it's just us and God. Right? So that's kind of your bonus that I want to throw in there. But I want to close with this today in challenging us and encouraging us and leave you with some questions to be helpful. And hopefully as a home church, you'll spend some deeper time talking about this. We've just kind of cracked the surface of relationships. I could talk about this all day long, but I really hope you have some impactful time of discussion in your home church today. But I want to go to John chapter 15, verse 12. John chapter 15, verse 12. And this is the commandment. I want you to understand that what we're doing when it comes to relationships is not an opinion, is not an option, but is a commandment from God, right? Don't get it twisted, right? It's not an option. Verse 12 says this is my commandment, that you love one another as you have been loved. Greater love has no one than this, that someone would lay down his life for his friends. In other words, those relationships are selfless. They're not just leeching, they're not just taking, but it's us giving of ourselves to one another, just like God did for us. In verse 14, he tells his disciples, he says, you are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servant. Now, this doesn't do away with being a servant. It's just that he's trying to teach them that this is extending beyond servanthood, rather indicating that relationship is important as well. He says, not just dictatorship, but relationship. So he says, no longer do I call you a servant, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. I call you friends. He says, I call you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask in the Father's name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you love one another. Relationships are vital. In fact, I want our relationships in our home churches, our on-site gatherings, our personal relationships with friends, co-workers, I want them to do a couple of things, right? I want them, first of all, to honor God. Do your relationships honor God? Secondly, I want to make sure that you're edifying people. You're living a sacrificial life, that you're making sure you're caring for the needs of others and ministering to others and encouraging others and holding others accountable, having tough conversations sometimes. So are they honoring God? Are they edifying people? But lastly, are they keeping you from going crazy? If you're in an unhealthy relationship, sometimes it is good to take a break and to find rest and solitude. And so I challenge you with that today. You're called to love one another, be in relationship. Are you creating space in your life to be in relationship, in Christian community, whether large or small, like in a home church? Are you creating space for that? Are you creating space for evangelism, to create relationships with non-believers in the workplace, at school, in your neighborhood? And then lastly, are you creating space for your relationship with God to flourish? Do you make space throughout the week to just spend time praying with God alone, in your word alone? Again, I learned so much from my sabbatical from this. It's necessary for us. And so whatever the relationship that you're pursuing, find that balance, find that rest, find that community, because God's calling us to that. And then by doing that, I believe that we will live out through our home church, through our on-site gathering, through our personal relationships, whatever it is, we will live out relationships that honor God, that edify people, and that keep us from going crazy. Thank you so much for attending today, our Sunday online service. We hope to see you next week as we continue in our series about home church. I'm really excited about next week. We're going to have a great time, so make sure you're back for that. I do want to leave you with this. If you have a need, if you have a prayer request, if there's something going on in your life that you need a pastor, I want you to know that we actually have a team of pastors at our church that are here to serve you. One of the best ways that you can get connected and that will help us find out what the need is by going to our hub. You can go to my1116.info and go to our pastoral care section. There you'll find links and buttons where you can get counseling, you can ask questions, you can let us know your needs, and we will do everything in our power to help serve you wherever you're at in your walk. So again, thanks for joining us today. We love you. We'll see you guys next week. Be blessed.